Hey, 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 I'm pretty excited to read to you. This is actually so fun. It's been a really long time since I've read to you guys, and I've missed it. Don't get me wrong, I've been having a lot of fun writing my book, and I have about 50 plus chapters now. I love writing, and I really don't like audio editing. It's not my favorite. I mean, I love how it makes it sound way better, but it's just so much work. Whereas writing is just so much fun. Anyways, I'll update you more on my book once I finish it. I'm getting pretty close. Speaking of stories that are fun to write, you guys have waited so patiently for this. Here it is. RadioStar Part 2. Series playlist is linked in the description. Hi, said the blonde boy in front of you, holding out a hand. I'm Nieto Monama, and who might you be? Nikki Yamada. You grinned brightly as you crushed his hand. He howled, keeling over. You have quite the grip. He shook his hand out delicately. Is that your quirk? No. You sighed, and gave him the blunt answer. I'm quirkless. He tilted his head, eyes unfocused, as though confused. Don't be so shocked, you scoffed. A lot of people are quirkless. I'm still the best at dodgeball. It's true, Tony told Nieto, slinging an arm around your neck. Casual as it was, the gesture declared his friendship to you loud and clear. You could handle yourself just fine. But Tony had become a bit protective after a few kids in your class had started making fun of you for being quirkless. I'm not shocked at all, Monama protested hurriedly. It's just that... He tilted his head in concentration, but was distracted as the desk he was leaning a hand on suddenly started to wobble. He jerked his hand away, and it smashed upward into the ceiling, staying there as though that was where it belonged. Nieto Monama's sea-gray eyes turned to Tony in awe. What a quirk, he breathed. Tony snapped his fingers, and the desk fell back down, making Monama jump aside. So, Tony smiled icily, you really are one of those dummies who's obsessed with quirks after all. No, Nieto protested weakly. I'm not. You probably have a quirk, don't you? Tony scoffed, not even waiting for Monama to nod. But no matter what your quirk is, you'll never be a match for Yamada. Several classmates, watching the spectacle, nodded in agreement. You glanced around, embarrassed and flattered at the same time. You'd worked so hard to think of strategies to excel, even as a quirkless kid suffering from narcolepsy. You'd created a personalized study schedule that allowed you to memorize class topics so well that you could take exams in half the allotted time, in case you fell asleep on your desk. And ever since your comeback, you'd been undefeated in dodgeball. The other kids had learned, by now, that you could be faking a sleeping episode. They no longer threw balls at you when you collapsed. And that opened the door to 100 other ideas, not to mention your wicked aim. Grades, dodgeball, and the attitude to go with it. It might not seem like much, but to 5-year-olds, you were the underdog everyone aspired to be. A small group of your classmates had even formed a fan club for you. Everyone, except for you, knew about it. The ones who made fun of you for being quirkless were mostly just jealous. Tony, the teacher barked. In your seat, now. The teacher glowered a little as the boy obeyed. Tony had always been a good kid. A little mischievous, nothing worse. But lately, he'd been using his quirk to intimidate other students, like the new kid, Nieto Monama. The teacher wasn't sure what had started his aggression, and chalked it up to another question to discuss at parent-teacher conference. Meanwhile, Nieto Monama turned his desk right side up, straightened it, and sat down behind you. He stared at the back of your head as you adjusted your thick, hot pink headband. Quirkless. If you were quirkless, then what had his own quirk absorbed from you? Why were you hiding your quirk? The teacher's voice droned on as he debated. He had 5 minutes before it vanished. Should he test your quirk, or not? The sight of Tony turning to pierce him with an icy glare made up his mind. Your overprotective friend would probably never let him shake your hand again. This was his only chance to find out what your quirk was. You swung your legs casually, alternating between doodling little characters and jotting notes, when suddenly you heard a thunk, slide, thump. When you turned to glance behind you, you saw Nieto Monama passed out on the ground by his chair. Present Mike wore many hats. Radio show host, music artist, independent hero. But there was one more that he didn't enjoy and never talked about. Present Mike was an agent for the Public Safety Commission. Making someone so loud and visible into a secret agent was the last thing anyone would expect. That's exactly what made it so perfect. He could usually double it with his routine hero work. Some agents worked underground, keeping an ear to the clandestine chatter and hum of the vigilante and criminal circles. But they also needed eyes and ears in the center of the action. And that's exactly where Mike existed at all times. Mike saw the necessity of the Public Safety Commission. Simply dealing with crimes as they arose was too disorganized. Lack of intel and coordination could cost innocent lives. The Public Safety Commission had saved countless people. But sometimes he hated their methods. Mike glanced sideways at the winged kid. "So," he grinned, sunglasses flashing, "how was the wrap-up of the train case last night?" He'd seen the incident on the news, red feathers swarming a train and stopping it before it could reach the exploded tracks. It had been the last of a series of deliberately caused train accidents. The police had been hunting for the villain for weeks, and had finally asked for the Safety Commission to step in. Keigo Takumi fixed his big gold eyes on him. No casualties. More importantly, I was able to gather DNA samples of the instigator, and they were arrested. Mike's grin grew a bit strained. A kid Keigo's age shouldn't be so serious all the time. "That's good, kid," Mike encouraged, clapping Keigo on the shoulder. The kid looked up at him in blank puzzlement. "Why are you acting like that? It's just us." He hesitated. "Should I start acting too?" Keigo knew how to act like a normal kid when necessary, putting on a cheesy grin, dumbing down his vocabulary, feigning a child's spontaneity and vulnerability. Watching him disseminate and reconstruct the personality he would have had in another life was even more painful to watch than his soldier persona, in Mike's opinion. "Please no," Mike replied hastily. "Just smile when you feel like it. That's the only reason to smile." "But yours is an act, isn't it?" Keigo studied him perceptively. Mike, about to protest, stopped short. "Maybe it is," he admitted. "Right now, at least. I just wish you weren't so serious, kid." The Public Safety Commission had drilled the kid with all the social skills he'd need, but they never taught him to have fun. They'd never taught him to feel safe or loved. They'd never taught him anything that would allow him to act less like a tool and more like a child. As Mike eyed the winged soldier kid, he found himself comparing him to a certain spunky radio star. "I'll never let the Public Safety Commission get their hands on Nikki," he thought, feeling a stir of anger. Right on cue, Mike's earpiece buzzed to life. "Agent Cockatoo, you there?" Mike cringed at his code name. The guys in IT thought it was so funny. "Why a cockatoo?" he demanded. "Everyone else has cool names. Even Keigo gets to be Hawks." By way of response, they just glanced pointedly up at his gelled hair. "It's cockatoo or banana," smiled the most annoying IT guy. "Take your pick." "I don't know which is worse," Mike had huffed, striding out of the room in disgust. That was the trouble with agencies. So many things were decided for you. You had to play your part, be a cog in the machine, or you'd ruin the whole operation. "Yes?" Mike muttered into the earpiece. "We have a situation." There was static for a moment while Mike and Keigo waited tensely. "Terrorist sighting." The voice came again, speaking rapidly. "Rainbow Bridge, possibly armed with explosives. You two are closest. Move now." Keigo grabbed Mike's belt and missiled skyward as Mike did his best to avoid kneeing himself in the face when acceleration folded him in half. He straightened clumsily, gazing over a scenic Tokyo. Sunlight glinted off skyscraper windows and the waves of Tokyo Bay. Across the bay stretched Rainbow Bridge, a suspension bridge stretching nearly 800 meters with capacity for 4 lanes of traffic. Tiny cars gleamed under the massive rectangular archways. "Closer!" Mike called, straining his eyes to see through the light between the tiny cars and specks of walking pedestrians. Keigo plummeted, swinging in to skim just above the lines of slowly moving cars. Some people honked, thinking that they were just a couple of teens flying in traffic for the heck of it. Mike scanned the range of expressions on the drivers and pedestrians, but nothing was out of the ordinary. No sign of terrorists. Unless... "Keigo!" Mike called. "Swing under the bridge!" The kid dove into a barrel turn, wings flipping sideways as he soared under. There. On the underside of the roadway, large dark boxes had been fastened by some kind of adhesive. Mike saw the silhouette of a man crouching in the shadows, easily sticking to the underside of the bridge as he fiddled with the bound boxes. A red light began to blink. Mike's stomach dropped. The boxes were enormous. Explosives of that size could destroy most of the bridge. "Eyes on target," he yelled into his earpiece. "Instruct on disarming the bomb." The shadowy man's eyes flashed unnaturally bright as he noticed them, and he darted away in a spidery motion, swinging up and around the bridge out of sight. "Disregard the bombs," a voice cut through his earpiece. "Capture the terrorist. We need him for questioning." The red light on the boxes began blinking slightly faster as Mike processed the words in shock. Maybe they didn't understand. "Sir," he explained rapidly, "the explosives are at least 90 kilograms. If we don't disarm, a lot of civilians will die." "Agent C." The voice went chillingly cold. "This situation requires fast action, not the delay of questions. Agent Hawks, take over." The winged kid obeyed instantly, swooping upwards in pursuit. It was in that moment that Mike stopped thinking of him as Keigo Takumi and started thinking of him only as Hawks. "Wait!" Mike cried desperately, twisting to keep watching the bomb until it vanished from sight. A series of memories flashed before his eyes. Throwing a glittering device to the ground, silencing the chatter in his ear. Climbing the steps of a marble building. Facing a crowd larger than anything he normally took on. Violence. Winning. And then, the shockwave. The horrible explosion that had changed everything. He relived that moment in slow motion, gazing down at the rapidly shrinking bridge as a new explosion boomed through his eardrums. Just like the explosion when his disobedience against direct orders had killed her. A bright pinprick of light became a massive cloud of light in an instant, engulfing cars and tossing several of them outwards in a wave. Debris fell into the water, and cracks split through the bridge. Suspension cords groaned. People screamed. Car alarms wailed. Slowly, a massive segment of the bridge began to tilt. It toppled sideways, plunging into the water with all of the cars sliding along it. Mike, in his shock, was thinking of her. Thinking of her smile, her beautiful strength and wisdom, the way she'd cherished him and Nikki. If he'd listened to the Public Safety Commission, Nikki would still have her mother. He'd vowed never to put his own judgment over direct orders again. But if obeying was always right, why did it feel so wrong? Tears slid across his face before being blown away, leaving salty skin and red-rimmed eyes. "Hawks, put me down. You'll be faster alone." The winged kid dipped down and dropped him on the roof of a skyscraper before missiling off. Mike dropped to his knees and gazed out at the smoke and pandemonium, staring into it as though it could give him the answers. "No way!" You jumped to your feet. "The new kid has narcolepsy too? What are the odds?" You paused as an alarming thought occurred to you. Wait, is it contagious? You glanced at the passed-out boy with a stab of guilt. He was sitting behind me. It must have spread to him. "Everyone, stay back!" you shouted, holding up a warning hand as Tony approached. "You'll catch my weird sleeping condition." All the kids, except for your friends, Tony and Mia, drew back several rapid steps. "Yamada," the teacher strode forward despite your warning. "Narcolepsy is not contagious. Put your hand down." You slowly relaxed your tense stance. If you're sure. But then, what happened to him? You watched as your teacher checked Monama's breathing and pulse, seeming faintly relieved afterwards. The teacher carefully lifted him, instructing her class to stay put. Can I come? You grabbed the edge of her jacket and looked up with pleading eyes. He's fine, Tony called, sounding annoyed. Let him be. You ignored his voice. Please? The teacher stared at you for a long moment, before sighing impatiently. Fine. To everyone else she called, Stay in your seats, I'll be right back. You walked extra fast to keep up with your teacher's big steps. Would you like to wait for him to wake up? Yes, please, you nodded. Very well. He'll need a hall buddy when he wakes up. I'll allow you to stay at the nurse's office to walk him back. But 10 minutes later, Monama still hadn't woken up. The school nurse had scanned him with her x-ray quirk, loosened his uniform collar, and propped up his feet slightly. She'd said he was in perfect health and would wake up soon. But that didn't explain why he'd blacked out in the first place. With every passing minute, you worried more. You couldn't shake the feeling that this had something to do with your narcolepsy, that you'd caused this somehow. You stared at his fluttering eyelids, his slightly open mouth, and the rise and fall of his chest. You frowned. Wake up already! But he didn't. Iridescent light lines began to zip across the room. You blinked and scowled. It was a bad time for hallucinations, and an even worse time for falling asleep. But there was nothing you could do. Ribbons of light shimmered across your vision and sucked you in, until you found yourself falling into the light tunnel. Goodbye, consciousness, you thought forlornly. You'd been lucky to get this far into the morning without falling asleep. Since it typically happened between 2 to 5 times per day, you knew the drill. 1. Light ribbon hallucinations. 2. Getting sucked into a light tunnel and losing consciousness. 3. Floating in the darkness, alone and disembodied, often while hearing voices. 4. Getting sucked back into the light tunnel. And 5. Waking up and checking the clock. There was no way to know if it had been 2 minutes or 10 minutes until you saw the clock. Time seemed to pass differently while you were asleep. The light tunnel ended and you floated in the darkness like usual. You sighed heavily. Hello, Black Void. Hello? Asked a scared voice. And hearing voices again. Hooray. But this voice was different. It echoed. The very slight echo that made it sound like it was ringing into an empty space. The way your voice did when you tried speaking into the darkness. Well, I'm gonna feel stupid when this turns out to be a hallucination, but... Hello? You replied grudgingly. Oh, thank goodness, the voice replied at once. There's someone else in here. Yeah, who are you? Nieto Monama. Huh, great. I guess I'm hallucinating about one of my classmates. That's what I get for worrying about him. Yamada? Monoma asked incredulously. Yep, it's me, talking to my hallucination. Though this is kind of new. They've never been able to hear me before. I knew it, he exclaimed with sudden passion. This is your quirk. Hallucinating? Pull yourself together, he demanded. I'm real. Yep, just as real as every other disembodied voice. Uh-huh. Listen to me, he urged. Don't you want to know how I got in here? Sure. It should be interesting to see what my subconscious comes up with, at least, you thought. My quirk allows me to copy and use other people's quirks, he said, emphasizing each word as though it was groundbreaking news. All I have to do is touch someone, and it's mine for up to 5 minutes. I shook your hand, copied your quirk, and decided to test it out. Then a bunch of light lines appeared, and I found myself in this place. I've been stuck here ever since. Interesting, you replied, seriously impressed with the things your sleeping mind could fabricate. Why don't you sound surprised? Were you just lying when you said you were quirkless? Don't get so grumpy, hallucination of Monama. It's just a really interesting story, that's all. I'm trying to figure out why I thought of something like that. Maybe it came from my desperation to have a quirk? Darn, I thought I'd gotten over that. You still think I'm a hallucination? Well, your story doesn't add up. Monama was already unconscious for over 10 minutes. If narcolepsy was a quirk that he copied, he'd have woken up when his 5 minutes ran out. Wait, what do you mean, asleep? Monama asked. We're not physically here? Nope. Maybe I can't leave because I need your quirk for that too. But how can I copy your quirk when I can't touch you? We're both just disembodied voices here. You should try, you suggested. I was sitting next to your bed. Who knows? Maybe when I fell asleep, I ended up touching you. Monama gasped suddenly. You're right! It worked! Ha ha! You're more fun than any of the other voices I've heard. I'm real, and I'll prove it! He was silent for a moment while you waited expectantly. As soon as I figure out how to get out. Good luck, you yawned. Less than a minute later, a tunnel of light appeared. Bye, hallucination, Monama, you laughed as you were sucked into it. You opened your eyes to find yourself slumped forward onto Monama's bed in the nurse's office, your hand resting comfortably on his face, nearly smothering him. To your surprise, his own hand came up, grasped your wrist, and moved your hand away to uncover his wide-awake glower. I'm not a hallucination, he snapped. Your jaw dropped. Radio hitchhiker. That's what they called people with your quirk. The light lines you'd seen were actually the radio waves that always existed around you. When you collapsed, you were focusing your consciousness into one of the radio waves and following it to its destination. When you floated in the darkness and heard voices, you were inside someone's mobile device, listening to the conversations happening around you until you could find or generate another radio wave to go back. It was an extremely rare quirk. No one had had it in over 50 years. That's why they'd misdiagnosed it as narcolepsy. Your quirk might be more of a hindrance than a superpower right now, but with time and training, you'd be able to do impossible things. Past radio hitchhikers had been able to ride radio waves physically as well as mentally, effectively teleporting themselves anywhere a radio wave could go. Some had even weaponized the ability to create radio waves by focusing the waves into a ray that could burn people. And many more had learned to decipher not only the voices heard around mobile devices, but also the voices, text, and other information carried in code by the radio waves themselves. Radio hitchhikers could go anywhere, learn anything. The Public Safety Commission had been searching for a radio hitchhiker for a very, very long time. We found one! The White Hat burst into the meeting. White Hats were professional hackers, invaluable in any intelligence agency. We found a radio hitchhiker! Everyone out! The Madam President ordered sharply. All the other officers, agents, and officials immediately stood, gathering their paper dossiers, and swept out with efficient speed. It was not uncommon for the president to call sudden and top-secret meetings. They knew the drill. Report, the Madam President snapped as soon as the doors had shut. How did you find them? Are they young? Yes, the White Hat nodded breathlessly. She's 5 years old. The Madam President curled her fingers around her armrest in an attempt to restrain her excitement. 5 years old. Excellent. They were still moldable. We found her through the registered quirk list submitted just today through the public hospital system, the White Hat went on. It seems she was previously misdiagnosed with narcolepsy, but after someone with a copy quirk was able to duplicate her symptoms, they corrected their diagnosis to quirk side effects of radio hitchhiking. What country is the child in? Urged Madam President, already mentally calculating flight times across the globe. Japan, right here in Tokyo. How convenient. Contact her parents and tell them we will need to take her for specialized training and, actually, the White Hat cut in apologetically, she only has one parent and he works for us. Perfect. Could it get any easier? She's Agent C's daughter. The rapidly turning wheels of Madam President's thoughts slowed, and she fixed the White Hat with an icy glare. Well, she scowled deeply. This may be difficult. Agent C, a.k.a. Present Mike, had been unstable ever since his wife's death. When the president had tried to summon the grieving man on a mission a week later, he'd threatened to yell the commission's top secrets to the whole city. He'd only calmed down when they'd given him time to mourn and take care of his infant daughter. Even last week, he ditched a mission when the girl's school had called in about her being sick or something. He was fiercely protective of his little girl. Everyone at the Public Safety Commission knew that. There was no way he'd let them take her for special training. The president steepled her fingers and sighed in frustration. They'd been searching and searching, and it just had to be Agent C's daughter, the one child they had no chance of training. We'll let her be for now, the president decided slowly as the white hat jotted notes. Once she's old enough to go to a hero school, we'll give her an offer she can't refuse. She'll either become our greatest weapon or our greatest enemy. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed RadioStar Part 2. What do you think about your new quirk? Are you more excited to be in Class 1B now that you know Monama is going to be your childhood friend? Who are your favorite characters in Class 1B? Put it in the comments. In the next chapter, you'll be 15 going on 16, and that means UA High. How will you figure out your super useful, yet difficult to master, quirk of radio hitchhiking? Will the Public Safety Commission be able to turn you into a weapon? Or will your dad protect you? Hit subscribe to stay tuned, and have a great week. Bye! It's just fired.